Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party and Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and advocate for the eco-socialist program that we ran on. And today we have a guest, Andy Ellis, who is a Green candidate for the nomination of the Green Party for governor of Maryland. But before I introduce him, I want to spend a couple minutes remembering David Schwartzman. At this hour down in Washington, D.C., there's a memorial and celebration of David's life that's beginning. David passed away from cancer on July 1st. And, that really caught me by surprise because I had been corresponding with him in the preceding days and weeks about how we can defeat Trumpism, the neo-fascism that's rising, and also about the COP30 climate summit in Belém, Brazil, and an eco-socialist conference that they're trying to put on before the climate summit. And David never mentioned he was sick. He was just focused on the issues until his death. David taught geochemistry at Howard University for 39 years. He was a professor emeritus when he passed. And he was a stalwart in the DC statehood Green Party, running for city council 3 times. And he was a leader in the Fair Budget Coalition in DC, providing progressive testimony to city council every year, including less than 2 weeks before he died. He was also, and this is what I think will live on, one of the world's top experts on climate change, climate policy, and the vision of an eco-socialist global Green New Deal. And we had a discussion about that with David on one of these Green Socialist Notes podcasts back on January 7th, 2023. We'll put the link to that in the chat. And we'll also post a link to his obituary in the Washington Post. And his websites. One's called Solartopia, the other's called The Earth Is Not for Sale. I think one of the most important contributions he made to the debate on climate policy and the debate that's come out of that around degrowth was the class analysis and the commitment to ending poverty that he brought to it. And we'll also put in there an article he wrote now 8 years ago in Socialism and Democracy called How Much and What Kind of Energy Does Humanity Need? And, we'll put that link in the chat. He argued that the overall energy production needs to grow from 18 trillion watts, what it was in 2016, to 25 or 30 trillion watts, in order to bring all the people on Earth above the minimum 3.5 kilowatts per person in primary energy consumption that is necessary to acquire the highest life expectancies we have in the world in some of the wealthy countries. And that means, he argued, that we need to radically grow the solar-powered renewable sector while we degrow other sectors, particularly fossil fuels and the military-industrial complex. He often said all that metal involved in weapons should be, instead of swords in the plowshares, it should be weapons in the solar and wind generators. And so he argued for, on the one hand, a significant reduction of average energy consumption per person in the wealthy global north, where we're well above 3.5 kilowatts per person, but growth in the south so people can get up to that minimum standard for a long, healthy life. So he's arguing for growth in some sectors and degrowth in others. And I think that was a needed corrective to the crude degrowth argument that we just need across the board to cut economic activity without regard to the economic sectors and the social classes. So for that, and look at the work on those websites. David is going to be sorely missed, but we should make sure that his ideas live on because they're very relevant to what we're trying to do in the Green Party. So I'm going to miss David. But Andy's alive and well. Andy is a Green running for the nomination of the Green Party for governor of Maryland in the 2026 election. He's a longtime Green Party member, having served on many state and national working groups and committees. In 2018, he ran for the Maryland General Assembly in the 45th district, and he came in ahead of the Republicans. Unfortunately, the Democrats still won. As chair of Baltimore for Democracy, a nonprofit group, last year he led a successful citywide campaign to defeat a well-financed effort to decrease the size of the Baltimore City Council. You know, that's what the rich want. They want fewer people to buy off. And Andy helped beat them back on that. And he was also appointed the year before by Baltimore Mayor Brandon Scott to the Baltimore City Charter Commission, which has a lot to do with the kind of democracy we have. It's a good position for a Green to be on. So Andy has a well thought out campaign, including fundraising plans, campaign plans, and we'll put the links to those plans and his campaign website in the chat. And, take those links, listen to what he has to say now, and then you can go read them later. So welcome, Andy. Why don't you just start off by giving us an overview of your campaign, your goals and your organizing plan, and the key policy planks?
Yeah, thank you, Howie. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and have this conversation. And I really appreciate the words that you had to say about David at the beginning. I think it was really, really grounding to understand, some of the folks who have come before us are passing away and they've done great work and we need to honor it. So thank you for doing that. Let me talk about my campaign a little bit. So I'm running for governor of Maryland as a Green Party candidate. In Maryland, if we get 1% in the gubernatorial and the presidential race, we can maintain ballot access. We've done that in a couple of presidential races in the past, but we've never done it in a gubernatorial race. But in 2022, we got pretty close. Nancy Wallace and Pat Elder ran a campaign as governor and lieutenant governor, and they got about 0.7, 0.75%. And they started their campaign in August of that year. So that's pretty good for a campaign that starts 90 days before the election. I looked at that campaign and I realized that if we spent 4 years building the kind of campaign that we need, not only could we get that 1%, but we could use the campaign to lay the groundwork for an independent left party in Maryland that challenges the single party rule of Democrats in Annapolis. And we could raise issues about multi-party democracy, and we could build the kind of coalitions that allow for a reorienting of what we're doing with politics here. So we started exploring from 2023, 2024, and then at the beginning of this year, we kicked off our campaign officially in Annapolis. And since then, we've been going around the state, talking to as many people as we can about why the two-party system is broken, why billionaires owning both of the parties get us the consequences that we need, and why we need a people-powered alternative that is ready to deliver for people, not for political lobbyists, for interest groups, for national narratives, and for big donors. So, it's going great. I'm excited. We're probably, 480 some odd days away from the election. And I'm really excited to be able to continue pushing and pushing and pushing. I mentioned at the beginning that 1% gets us ballot access. But for me, not about 1%. At this point, our goal is to aim for 100,000 votes, which would be the most votes, would be the best performance for a third-party campaign in a gubernatorial race in Maryland history. And we think if we can do that, we can begin a transformation of Maryland politics that moves us away from a broken two-party system toward a multi-party system in which more voices are heard, more policies are discussed, and more people feel represented.
So what are the key issues? And who are your opponents? Probably people know who they are.
Yeah. So the Democrat incumbent is Governor Wes Moore. If you ever watch any of the Sunday shows or any of the news shows, you will see him on constantly saying that he's not running for president and talking about how well things are going in Maryland. The belief here is that he is in fact running for president, but he went on The View and said he's not running for president. So I guess, who am I to disagree with him? But Wes Moore is the incumbent, and he is a Democrat who was elected first black governor of Maryland, only black governor in the nation. The Republicans have not yet chosen their candidate, but there's a lot of discussion that former Governor Larry Hogan, who flirted with the no labels run for president in 2024, there's a lot of opportunity that Maryland could, that Larry Hogan could come back as the opponent. If it's not Larry Hogan, Larry Hogan's pretty much the only Republican in the state of Maryland that can put up a contest against a Democrat. In 2022, after 8 years of Larry Hogan, they ran a guy, Dan Cox, who was a mega guy, and he lost by 35 points. So either it's going to be a very close race where we have, where our margin may make the difference, or it's going to be a blowaway race where we can make the case for an independent third party very easily. So that's the who are the opponents part. The major issues facing Maryland right now are our economy. We're very dependent on DC. And so the Trump administration has really hurt Maryland quite a bit. Our energy sector is really strained right now because we're constrained by this sort of regional transmission organization that is very fossil fuel oriented. And so energy prices are going up. And then housing. Housing is a huge issue here. We have the highest number of rental evictions in the country. And so those are issues that are really pressing for Marylanders right now. Our campaign is focused on a couple of things. We think that we need a call for a multi-party and grassroots democracy. We need a solidarity economy that is not dependent on Wall Street or dependent on DC. We need green, people-powered energy in order to break the stranglehold that the corporations have on it. We need reparations. Maryland had I hope we get to talk about that a little bit. Maryland had a reparations study bill that Governor Moore vetoed and that we support. And we need to divest Maryland from war. We need to divest Maryland from war and the war economy because it is heavily invested in genocide, war, and imperialism. So those are a couple of the issues that we're going to be talking about. This, it's governor. It means that it's a big state, so there's a lot to talk about. But those are some of the state's big issues and the core ways that we're focusing on it.
Well, why don't we dig into one of those or dig into them in turn? Multi-party democracy. So what are you proposing to institutionalize that in Maryland?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things here that I think will help institutionalize it. First off, it's important to note that Maryland has a Democratic supermajority in the General Assemblies that is gerrymandered in order to protect that supermajority. So we're in a place where, regardless of who the governor is, the General Assembly, which is our legislative branch, has a multi-vote veto-proof majority. So that is sort of the context here. And I will say it's also important to note that in Maryland, Democrats have been largely in control of the General Assembly since 1866. One of the few states in the country where Democrats were in control in 1866 and are in control right now. So the first thing that we would do to change this, we don't think that body is going to do any electoral reform on its own. So if I was, we are pushing for a citizen initiative here in Maryland so that people have the ability to change the structure of government in a way that is helpful. We do have multi-member districts in our lower house. So that is a good entry point to being able to have a proportional system. So once we got the citizen initiative, I would like to see a citizen initiative that pushed for proportional representation. The second thing is expanding public financing to all races in the state. Right now, we have several counties that have public financing, but we don't actually have, we have several counties that have public financing, and we have public financing for the governor's race, but we don't have it for everything else. So we need to push and expand it out for all races. The third thing is debate access. So Maryland Public Television receives 30% of its funding from the state of Maryland, about 10% of its funding from the federal government. Well, it did until recently. And we are considering trying to find somebody who will help us to pass legislation which requires Maryland Public Television to give debate access to all of the candidates on the ballot. Currently, they only allow the top two parties to have access via the way that they define access. And we think that when Marylanders hear the choices that they have, they will choose choices outside the two-party system. So those are a couple of things that we can start with. There is constitutional amendment to allow citizen initiative, expand public financing across the state, and expand debate access through the public television station.
What is the public financing system for candidates for governor?
So it is largely funded by fines and fees that are assessed to campaigns that have been delinquent or whatever, and they've stepped up the enforcement of that in order to fund the campaign or fund the fund. So that's a good part about it. It is funded by people who are making campaign finance, like violating the law on campaign finance and violating the regulation on campaign finance. So the way it works is we need 1,500 Maryland voters to donate $120,000, and nobody can donate more than $250. Now, Maryland is a state where a governor and a lieutenant governor run together. So we have to file for the public financing as a ticket. And we hope to have that ticket together. I'm not ready to make an announcement here today, but we have a person who I think will be our running mate. And so at the beginning of 2026, we will be creating that public financing entity, and we will be going for it. The only person who has gotten it so far is Governor Larry Hogan got it in his first run in 2014, but no third party has gotten it, and we think we can do so. It's a big lift to get 1,500 donors and $120,000, but we also think it's a laudable goal that a lot of people support, and we'll use our organizing networks to tap into. Now, I think the match on that is 6 to 7 times for the first $25, 4 to 5 times for the next $50 or something like that. So even at the minimum level, we're talking about, if we succeed at that, getting $600,000 or $700,000 in August of 2026, and that would be a game changer for spreading the message, building out the network, and making sure people are aware that they have a choice beyond the two parties.
I got my calculator. I'm figuring out what it's going to take what the average donation of those 1,500 people would be.
It's like $85, I think.
Is it? Okay. And it's a 6 or 7 times match for the first 25. Yeah, that I think is definitely an achievable goal. The donors have to be in state, right, to qualify?
Yep, the donors have to be in state, so out-of-state donors will still be able to donate because our campaign finance system is broken. You can have a separate account that allows for out-of-state donors to fund it, but the in-state match donations have to be in-state residents.
We got the link to Andy's donate page, so let's put that in the chat. So wherever you live, you can give them some seed money. So when the public financing period opens up, he'll have some resources to work with. I think, if you can achieve that, you're right. You can do a lot of damage. I think Zoran Mondani, he got an 8-to-1 match. He raised, I think he got 1,800 donations to raise $1 million, which was the max he could get matched for public funding. So he had $8 million in March, at the end of March, and he told his people, all right, stop raising money. Let's focus on the campaign. We got $8 million to work with. So that is good. I know in New York, man, I'm running against, Cuomo and the Wall Street crowd, and there was no public financing. But so you got a leg up there. So the other thing I want to really good goal to work for.
The other thing that I will say about public financing is we're going to do our level best to hit that goal. But 6 counties in Maryland for their municipal and county elections also have public financing. And so we see this not just as something about this campaign, but we also see it as part of building a movement of green campaigns that can use public financing. So say in the future, somebody is running for Baltimore City Council, and we have a list of donors that are from Baltimore City. I'm going to call those folks and say, hey, can you donate to Tim? He's running for Baltimore City Council on a publicly financed thing. Give him $25 and help him get to the goal. So we see public financing not just as a one-time shot, but as part of the power of building an organization that is independent from the donors and the two-party system on the left. And we would hope to see public financing spread to all of the counties so that was something that could happen there as well.
Okay, let's move on to another issue. You talked about a solidarity economy.
Yeah.
What would be the concrete proposals that you would put out there to implement that? Going back to Mondani, he was laser focused on the theme of affordability, and he had 3, concrete demands that people could grasp and believe in. And that was fast and free buses, a freeze on rents and rent controlled apartments, and universal child care. So what are you looking to propose for Maryland?
Yeah, so first let me say the Mamdani campaign has been really influential for us, and we are looking at our solidarity economy stuff this summer in light of what he was able to achieve there. But what we've already proposed are a couple of things. One is a public bank for the state of Maryland so that we're not dependent on Wall Street and we're not dependent on those big banks. There's been some study bills that have made a little bit of progress in Maryland, but they haven't really gone full forward. So public bank for Maryland would be one thing. The second thing would be increased progressive taxation on the wealthiest folks and on the corporations, and cut corporate tax breaks for out-of-state multinational and military-industrial complex corporations. The third thing would be widespread expansion of cooperatives as a means of keeping local control over the economy and making sure that there is, businesses are owned by people who are here in Maryland. A bill passed last year that made it easier for existing businesses to transition into cooperatives and for cooperatives to get formed. And we would expand on that and use that as a key investment vehicle. I also think that we are looking at funding the community repair and reinvestment funds, which were set up as part of the cannabis legalization process here. They are funds where a chunk of the cannabis money gets sent to each county, and a local body gets to a point where those resources go, as opposed to the state getting to decide it. And those are a couple things. I think one other thing that we have thought about a lot in this regard is some targeted basic incomes in places that they're necessary. In my 2018 campaign, we proposed targeted basic incomes for people who were returning citizens from incarceration and for young people who were in Baltimore City schools. These were widely popular proposals. People liked them. People were excited about them. And I think that those type of things are the type of things that we can do to help stimulate the Maryland economy. And then I would say another part of this is really making sure that when we do invest tax breaks, they're in Maryland-based companies, and they're in companies that are not going to leave and go to Alabama or something like that. We've spent too much Maryland taxpayer dollars on folks that are out-of-state companies that we lure here for 5 years, and then they leave and get a better deal. And we need to stop doing that and use any tax breaks that we're going to use in order to encourage growth of businesses in Maryland. So those are a couple of the things that we've talked about so far with it. And then we're going to look at the stuff that Mamdani talked about to understand some of the specific programs that we think the state could take over that are currently dominated by the private sector and these sort of state-funded nonprofit type of programs.
I imagine housing is a huge issue there, just affordability like it is everywhere these days.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Mamdani was talking about, in addition to the rent freeze, which they already have, something like, I think it's half the apartments in New York City are rent regulated. So that affected a lot of people, but he was talking about 200,000 units of public housing, social housing, he called it, which freaked out Wall Street, but not completely. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal right after he got elected about the millionaires supporting him. They really understand that to have a thriving city, you got to make sure the working class can afford to live there. So anyway, social housing, might be something you want to look into.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think so Maryland has the highest eviction rate of any state in the country at this point. And prices are so incredibly high because you have this concentration of wealth in the DC area. And you have what used to be sort of counties where the median income was over $100,000 because of the federal government. And so the core suburban and urban counties in Maryland are so costly that it is pushing more and more people to the rural counties to the west, the north, the east, and the south. And the rents are going up there. So we need to figure out some way to cap rents. We need to figure out some form of social housing. And we need to make sure that not all housing dollars are going toward sort of middle-class home ownership, but that they're also going to make sure that people have a roof over their heads before we are subsidizing, people who make $500,000 to build a house.
Well, let's talk about reparations, which if you're talking about solidarity and repairing wrongs that were done, that would seem to be under that rubric.
Yeah.
And you've had some legislation there that I understand Wes Moore vetoed.
Yeah.
So talk about that and talk about the kind of reparations program you would like to see.
Yeah. So this year, the Legislative Black Caucus in Maryland, which is the largest legislative Black caucus in the country, represents about 30%. 1/3 of the legislature, which is about parallel to Maryland's Black population. We have a Black governor, Black Speaker of the House, Black Attorney General. One of the places where Black political power is most consolidated in the country. This year, they sponsored a bill, SB 587, which would have established the Maryland Reparations Commission. And this commission would have not really studied whether reparations are due, though that was part of it. But it was pretty clear from reading the bill that it was more focused on how to implement reparations at the state level. So the bill would have had a 2-year study period, and it would have presented recommendations to the next governor in January of 2027. So whoever the next governor is would have had this bill or these recommendations on their desk first thing. Passed both houses, no opposition from the governor's office at any of the public hearings. All Democrats voted for it. All Republicans voted against it. So then after session, when we were in the time where the bills needed to get signed, everybody kind of expected he was either going to get signed or Governor Moore was going to let it go into place without his signature. Eventually, though, he vetoed it. He vetoed it, and he said, we've done enough studying, and my programs, the programs that he has been doing, things like funding HBCUs, funding Black entrepreneurship, he said, those were enough. He said, this is enough. We don't need to study anymore. We're already doing the work. So we as myself and several other folks who regularly work outside of the two-party system kind of had an idea that he was going to veto it when we saw it coming, more, I think, than many of the folks who worked within the Democratic Party did. So we prepared our reparations proposal, and what our reparations proposal does is it builds on the things that are in the Green Party platform. We centered this on the fact that the Green Party has been advocating reparations in one form or another for 25 years, and so we put together a comprehensive reparations program. It includes increased funding to those community repair and reinvestment funds that I had talked about earlier in order to repair the communal damages that are done by racist policy in Maryland. It includes a commission not under the control of the state government, but made up of Black independent civil society and scholarly and religious organizations. It does include some cash payment reparations. We can talk a little bit more about cash payment at the state level. I think there's, it's complicated because it's not the same thing as it is at the national level, but nonetheless, there's still some responsibility at the state level for very actuarial things. If your home was redlined by the state government and the banks, that has material damage, and there should be recovery. There should be repair for that. If your home was seized, if a free person's home was seized on the Eastern Shore after Maryland's truncated Reconstruction, that has lasting damages, and there should be repair for that. If people were enslaved, there should be repair for that. So we believe that cash is a part of it, but it can't be alone. And then there's also a part that focuses on cemeteries and spiritual places in line with our comrades from Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition. Folks can read our reparations platform at gogreen.com/reparations. We think it's an important part of the debate, and we want to be able to get on the debate stage with Larry Hogan and Wes Moore and move the debate past whether they are due and start asking the question, what should we do in order to fix the repair, to fix the damage that has happened in the past and to make repair?
Well, I hope you get in those debates. That's a discussion needs to happen. You talk about, you said you're going to talk more about cash payments, but I think you explained it in the context of Maryland.
Yeah.
We've talked before about the larger question of individual cash payments versus community reparations, where you're rebuilding lack political and economic power through institutions. If you just hand out cash in the existing structure, which is structurally racist, you're not going to get the repair that we need. I often talk about the analogy: are you going to play climate reparations by just handing out checks in the global South? How are you going to mitigate the problems with renewable energy construction, or adapt to the problems from sea level rise and changes in climate? You can't do that with just handing out checks to people. You got to have some collective action. Yeah. So I think that is it's good that you guys have that in mind.
Yeah, and the community repair and reinvestment funds that I mentioned were really championed by a group called Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, and they very much believe in the position you're advocating there, which is that we need to repair the damage that was done to communities and institutions if the cash payments are going to work. Our approach to this is that it's comprehensive. There's some things that are individual and actuarial, and you need to pay for those. There's other things that are communal and institutional, and there needs to be investment in those as well. And there's still other things that are spiritual and sacred, and there needs to be investment and understanding in those as well. I think too often this debate at the macro political level is about whether they're due between Democrats and Republicans, and then various parts of the pro-reparations community divvy up whose particular form of reparations should get the entirety of the focus. I don't think any of that captures the whole necessity of repair, and I think we need a comprehensive approach to repair, not this type, that type, or the other, all of them as they are necessary to bring about justice.
Yeah, I would think Wes Moore would be vulnerable to you if you just ask him, okay, these programs that you have, how long will it take before outcomes are equal?
Yeah.
I bet he hasn't thought of that.
And I mean, it's interesting because he says, it's so fascinating because he prioritized closing the racial wealth gap as one of his sort of campaign priorities. And he's got the right language. Wes Moore is really interesting. He has the kind of folks around him who give him the language that appeals to radicals and progressives, and he uses it for policies that are not very radical or progressive, which is, of course, why people want him to be the Democratic nominee for president, because he's very good at playing that game where he uses the right words and then uses it to describe neoliberal policy. And, what I would like him to do in a debate is defend the Democratic Party's framework to this, which is poverty reduction, affirmative action. That's fine. That's an okay framework. That is what the Democratic Party has done for 60 years. And I would like him to get on the debate stage and say, we don't need to have a reparative framework. We should defend what's working. And here's why I'm invested in it. I don't think he'll do that because I think he's good at using the language of radicals and of progressives in order to, as I said, mask neoliberal policies. But I would love to have that debate with him and be on a stage with him where we get to ask him those questions.
So you talked about divesting from war. What does that mean concretely in Maryland?
Yep. So the Maryland Israel Development Corporation, I believe it is a joint venture between the Maryland Department of Commerce and the government of Israel. And they just recently announced that they are working with a company that builds kamikaze drones. That's not the only one. There's other ones that build security. There's other things that do all sorts of, stuff that helps Israel defensively and offensively, security inside Israel proper, and, genocide in Gaza. So we would end the Maryland Israel Development Corporation right away. There's also a collaborative program between the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and Tel Aviv University. And if you've read Maya Wynn's book, Towers of Ivory and Steel, she talks about the way that the Israeli university system is intertwined with the genocidal system in Israel, and the way that these U.S. partnerships between universities in the U.S. and universities in Israel are oftentimes really not helping the students at either college, but they're there to facilitate sort of an exchange around security and around scholarship. So we would end that program as well. There is also just a lot of taxpayer money invested in defense companies and defense contractors and things like that. And I think that once we start looking at where the money is that is going directly toward aiding Israeli genocide, we also start to see that it is, a lot of our economy is dependent on imperialism. And those large military industrial complex or companies, they don't need our taxpayer dollars if they want to set up here. And frankly, if they want to go to Virginia, that's fine. Virginia will be happy to welcome them. So those are a couple things that we're going to do there right away. I think a lot of those things probably, are within executive power. And then the last thing I'll say is there's an executive order that Governor Hogan proposed on boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Governor Moore excitedly extended it, and we're going to end that. What your position on Israel and Palestine is should not have any bearing on whether you can get state contracts or not. And it is there largely to be performative and signal a commitment to the Israeli government and the Israeli military industrial complex. And I don't think that's in the benefit of Marylanders.
What's the debate like in Maryland politics, if there is one, on how Maryland should relate to Israel?
It's interesting. So, I would say that the vast majority of the Democratic establishment and the vast majority of the supermajority is very pro-Israel. But I think that the base is, as is the case in a lot of places, the base is increasingly anti-Israel and pro-Palestine. And so, as I said earlier, Maryland is a, supermajority Democrat state, and it has been supermajority Democrat in the legislature for decades. And what that means is that it errs toward purple districts. It errs toward trying to make sure that the people in the purple districts win, and most of the people in the purple districts are pro-Israel. Last year, there was an instance where Casa de Maryland, which is a local immigrant rights group, their executive director made a post about, Free Palestine. And the entire Montgomery County Senate delegation, which is the largest county, most wealthy county in the state, denounced him and threatened to take away the money that the state gives CASA for threatened to take away the money that the state gives CASA for immigrant, job training, immigrant language training, immigrant housing, all the services that they do through CASA, which is interesting because it shows very clearly that divestment is something that is on the minds of many Democrats, but only divestment when it is against somebody who is pro-Palestine, not when it is against somebody who is pro-Israel.
I think you're right that the rank and file voters want an arms embargo of Israel.
Yeah.
CBS polled 3 times after the October 7th attack by Hamas. And I think in early November, 52% were already saying, because Israel was just bombing the hell out of Gaza, that we should have an arms embargo. And they polled twice more, and it got up to near 60, and then 61% in June 2024. And then there's been no more polling, which is a statement in itself, because the movement's been making an issue, the pro-Palestinian solidarity movement, but at least establishment media and pollsters have not thought that was a relevant question. But I think as this goes on, I would be surprised if it wasn't more than 61% that think there ought to be an arms embargo, which to me says you should go on the offensive against Moore and Hogan. Why are they supporting arming Israeli genocide in Gaza? Yep. And, aggression against all its neighbors? Because your position will be attacked by the pro-Israel lobby.
Yeah.
But I would welcome that because that gives you a platform to respond on. And they're going to be, I think, in a hard position politically because they're pandering to the pro-Israel lobby, which puts a lot of money into politics. But the base is like saying Israel's gone too far and we should stop giving them arms. So I think that's a winning issue.
At the Maryland level, the governor, frankly, shouldn't have much other than the bully pulpit to talk about Israel. right? Like, it shouldn't be the job of the governor to weigh in on the Israeli-Palestinian, Israeli genocide. But Maryland has made it that way by this joint venture with the government of Israel, by these collaborations between the state colleges, and by this BDS EO, and so it is like, if you're going to make it an issue, we're going to take our position on it, and we're going to explain to folks for whom that is a red line. Like, I think the Democrats have not wrapped their head around the fact that that is a red line for many voters, and that if you are pro-Israel, a week after October 7th, Wes Moore got in front of some clearly illegally made, woven together Israeli-American flag. And he said, we stand with the people of Israel, we stand with Israel's right to defend itself, and we stand with Israel's right to exist. Clearly understanding the talking points that he needs to be in order to be a presidential candidate of the Democratic Party. I agree with you. I think this is an issue that especially, it may not be an issue that helps us get to 51%, but it is certainly an issue that will help us get to 1%, and certainly an issue that will help us get to 100,000 votes.
Well, with the time we have left, we have a few questions and comments in the chat.
Yeah.
And, if you're watching this live stream, we welcome those questions and comments. So why don't we see what people are asking? And
I love it. Let's go.
Scout Trooper 164, what exactly can we do to win? The moment our opponents take corporate money, they have a shitload of resources we wish we had access to. And the hate for progressives and socialists is like a swarm. So what do you think, Andy?
Yeah, so first of all, winning is going to take time, and it's going to take building power. We're not going to just win right away because we want to. We have to have a committed plan that builds the kind of power that takes people out of the two-party system and allows big races like mine, or the one that Howie ran, to create power structures that allow smaller races to win. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is, public financing is the best tool we have right now in order to equalize the effect of big money. It doesn't equalize, but the difference between a campaign that has $600,000 and a campaign that has $6,000 is huge. And so public financing is a good goal to rally around, and it is a good way to build the kind of institutional power that we need in order to take them on. The third thing I would say is we have to insist that there be an independent move toward a left-based, worker-based, grassroots-based political party, and we cannot accept that trying to transform the Democratic Party from within as the only strategy is a way to move forward. So, I think the couple of things there: realistic understanding of what we have to do in order to win, public financing, and then consistently making the argument for an independent third party outside, or an independent party on the left, on the grassroots, for workers outside of the main two-party system.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that too. We are winning in local races. We can win those now.
Yeah.
And, as I've said many times, the Greens have about 160 in office. We won, I think it's over 1,600 races over the years. We should be electing thousands. And that creates the base, the foundation for winning office in these larger races. But as Andy pointed out, you don't have to win the office to win the race from your point of view, because you set up goals like 100,000 votes or the 25,000 votes minimum to get a ballot line, the public campaign financing. All that is progress and gives you goals that are realistic to shoot for, instead of saying, I'm going to win, when probably not. You never rule it out, but you don't, give people, you gotta tell, as Amilcar Cabral used to say, tell no lies, claim no easy victories. People
Right.
respect that. And as far as the hate for progressives and socialists, I put this in the chat. I have the current issue, or now it's the winter issue of New Politics. I had a long article titled "The Political Paradox," and it's about how a progressive-leaning public elected a far-right president. And how the hell did that happen? The public is with us. And they don't vote for progressive or socialist. They vote for things like, basic income that Andy was talking about. Or, Mamdani, he's a good example now, free and fast buses, rent freeze on regulated apartments, and universal child care. There's an issue that is really popular if you look at the polling. Those are progressive demands. They're demands socialists would support, and people don't hate those. So let's not underestimate the kind of support there is for what we're talking about. As Ralph Nader used to say, the Green Platform has majoritarian support. We just got to find a way to translate that progressive majority out there into an effective political force. And I agree with Andy. Inside the Democratic Party, you spend more time fighting your so-called Democratic comrades in the corporate wing than you do, advancing your program. You're just better off being independent and speaking directly to the people. So let's see what else people had in mind for questions. Michelle de Villiers, it's probably French, and my French, I don't have any French, but sorry if I said it wrong. How does Andy feel about the recent solar farm issue in Maryland?
Yeah, so first of all, welcome, Michelle. Excited to have you here. Michelle, might very well be a candidate of her own at some point, and you should definitely have her on as well, Howie. So let me talk about the solar farm issue that happened here recently. There was a piece of legislation that the Democrats sponsored this year, which would have allowed the state government to override local zoning on solar farms. And where most of these solar farms are going are in forests and in farmlands in rural parts of the state. So the Republicans who are in the rural parts of the state, and the Maryland Association of Counties were really upset about this legislation this year because it was taking away the local ability to decide specific sites where solar would go. Now, I'm all for the state setting targets of the amount of energy produced being from renewables and things like that. But I don't really like this particular type of sort of political gamesmanship around the issue where, they're taking away the power of locals in order to determine siting. And so I think one of the things that's really interesting, I was out with Michelle in Cumberland in Western Maryland at Pride a couple of weeks ago, and there was a guy there who was asking about this, and he was not necessarily agreeing. I think he was there to help his mom set up, more conservative than most of the folks at our table. But what he said was, I don't like the idea that they want to take this mountainside or this farmland and make it a solar farm and that we don't have any say over it. What I would love, he was in the building trade, just like what I would love is if we were figuring out how to put rooftop solar in all the buildings in Cumberland, on the prisons, on the colleges, on the schools, all of those type of things. And he said, I'd love it if the community college over there would help to invest in that type of thing so that I could get a crew of guys that graduated from the high school and the community college and we could start installing solar on these rooftops. And I thought that was really interesting because what it showed me was that folks who we consider more conservative and in a two-party system might not feel like they're down for renewable energy or things like that, are down for it when the locals get to have a say in how it gets placed, but are not down for it when the Democrats in Annapolis tell the rural counties that they've got to deal with these big solar farms on their farmland and their forests, while at the same time not doing the same thing in their own counties. When you have a supermajority, you don't have to pay attention to the opposition. And when you don't pay attention to the opposition, sometimes you don't get to hear really good things like we should invest in rooftop solar in these areas instead of taking up valuable farmland and taking up valuable, mountainsides and in forests. So I would say that, yes, we need to continue to aggressively push solar in Maryland, but we need to do it in collaboration with the localities, and we need to make sure that the burden is not placed on the rural areas just because they happen to elect Republicans. We need to share the burden across the state and make sure that everybody is helping us get the energy that we need.
Okay. What we got now? Justice B. Hey, hi, Andy. Thanks so much for your presence online and everywhere. Will your campaign be on the ballot?
Yes, absolutely. So in 2024, we were able to get on the ballot. And the way that it works in Maryland is that if you get on the ballot via petition, like we did in 24, you get 2 cycles. So that got us 24, and we will be on the ballot in 26, and we have other candidates that will be on the ballot as well. Now, if we get 1% in that race, we get to stay on the ballot, which means the 2028 elections, like in Baltimore City, where we've had some of our best performances, will immediately be qualified for the ballot. If we don't get 1%, we'll have to petition again. And it's hard. We spent 2 years, a person died, and we spent $50,000 trying to get on in 2024. And that becomes prohibitive at some point. So we are on the ballot. Greens are on the ballot across the state. And if we get 1% this time, we stay on the ballot in 2028.
Michelle de Villiers, or close to that. I'm not sure I got the last name right, but Michelle, is replacing old tobacco cash crop with hemp a feasible path to bringing jobs to more rural Marylanders and industry to Cumberland?
Absolutely, it is, right. Cumberland is the Appalachian city that used to be the second biggest city in Maryland. It's out in the west of Maryland. And it has gone through significant deindustrialization over the last couple of years. And as a result of that, the jobs have decreased, the addiction has increased, and it's an Appalachian town facing a lot of pressure from deindustrialization. That town has been paying remote workers to come live there from, Pittsburgh, DC, and Baltimore suburbs. And that's great. It's good to get some of those folks there. It's good to get the tax base there. But that is not a way to revive a town that is based on industry. So we need to look at what we can do in order to incentivize cooperative development, state-run development, and financing through the public bank of a reindustrialization of Cumberland around something like hemp, so that we can not make our industries reliant on importing, whatever they have to from around the world, but we can build industry that is rooted on things that we can produce here in Maryland. Appalachia at the turn of the 20th century, the turn from the 19th to the 20th century, was producing large amounts of hemp, and I think it could produce that again. And we could have towns like Cumberland build, new age manufacturing facilities to convert that hemp into all sorts of things, everything from, chemicals that can make, or byproducts that can make solar panels to paper, to energy, to whatever. So absolutely. Hemp has to be part of the strategy for reindustrializing the parts of the state that are deindustrialized right now.
Andrew Hager. Andy, how do you feel about researching renewable fuels and concocting a formula for the perfect biomass to replace coal and crude oil?
I mean, if we have the perfect biomass, absolutely we should research it. I mean, I think the thing here is that so much of Maryland's energy choices are constrained by the regional transmission operator. And I don't want to get too far in the weeds of what this is, but it is a body that sits over a large group of states and determines how those states are going to mix their energy. And so that constrains Maryland, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, North Carolina, Virginia, Ohio. A whole bunch of states right now are constrained by this regional transmission operator that is controlled largely by the fossil fuel companies. So while we are researching renewables, while we're looking at hemp, while we're trying to find the perfect biomass to replace coal and crude and fracking, we also need to be building the political infrastructure across state lines to have a different kind of regional energy grid, one that is green, one that is people powered, one that is democratic, and one that is not serving the shareholders, but is rather serving the residents. So yes, let's go for it. Let's do whatever we can to break our dependence on fossil fuels and to break our dependence on the institutions the fossil fuel companies have set up to make sure we stay dependent on them.
I would just add that biofuels should not be a big part of a renewable energy future, because biofuels require burning.
Yeah.
The biofuel, which creates carbon emissions, inevitably nitrogen oxides, which is a greenhouse gas and unhealthy for us in terms of its corrosion of the lungs. There are niche uses, I think, like if you've got a landfill or a water treatment plant where if you don't process the organic matter into natural gas, it's going to be released into the atmosphere as methane and carbon anyway. So you can capture that and then power the water treatment plant, or energy requirements, electricity requirements near the around a landfill where this stuff is rotting. That makes sense. But we're at a point now where wind, solar, and storage together are cheaper than any other form of energy. And the costs are dropping, particularly the storage part of that. It just dropped like a rock last year. So, that's the cheapest way to get to the renewable future, instead of, trying to find another biofuel, or, the craziest thing, we're getting this in New York. I don't know if you're getting it in Maryland. This, Governor Hochul wants to build new nuclear power plants.
Yeah.
She's out of her damn mind, but we got better options.
Yeah, I mean, Wes Moore wants to build new nuclear. He wants to build He wants to build new nuclear, and he wants to build modular reactors, and he wants to expand natural gas and all of that. Again, he's running for president as a Democratic candidate. Well, I'm sorry, no, he says he's not running for president as a Democratic candidate, but he is getting all the talking points down to be a nationally prominent Democrat, and right now that includes that stuff. And at the end of the day, for all of this stuff, nothing we talk about from an energy perspective in Maryland matters if we don't solve the issue of this corporate-controlled regional transmission operator, because they're the ones who determine what can come online. They determine whether new solar can come online. They determine whether new storage can come online. They determine whether we can shut down old coal and gas plants. So for Maryland, the key is to work with the regional states in order to build a new Democratic green regional transmission operator before we can really talk about the mix of what kind of energy we want.
Yeah, you're talking about public power for the power production, at least.
Yeah,
I think it should include the fossil fuel companies, Chevron, ExxonMobil, and the rest, and use the profits they generate from the sale of fossil fuels that they're already producing, and instead of reinvesting it in more renewables, reinvested in, more fossil fuels, reinvested in renewables. They will never do that unless we take them over public control. So that is, I was just going to
go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that has to be central part of the green platform.
Yeah,
and I was disappointed in Mamdani on energy. He wants to carry through programs the state and city already have, but he hasn't talked about taking over Con Ed, which would really give them the power to move much faster on renewables. Go ahead.
So it's interesting. In addition, the same day that Wes Moore vetoed the reparations bill, he also vetoed two other bills. One of those bills would have been to tax the top 10 fossil fuel producers at a big enough rate in order to reinvest in remediation, readiness, and renewables. Whether we I don't love these sort of tax the polluters. I don't mind it as a gateway, but ultimately we need to take over those organizations. But he vetoed that bill, and he also vetoed a bill that would have studied the impact of data centers in the state of Maryland. And what's interesting about this thing is that these two things are connected, because the data centers in Maryland and throughout the area that is connected to Western Pennsylvania and Ohio are being funded by the fossil fuel companies who are fracking. They want to invest in these data centers so that they can drive the demand up for their products, so that solar and wind on the grid right now can't replace it, because solar and wind are moving so quickly to replace it. So what do? They go invest in these huge data centers that are incredibly energy intensive. And it's interesting that Moore vetoed both a bill that would have tax the highest producers or the highest fossil fuel producers, and one that would have studied the impacts of data centers, because while he's not taking money directly from the fossil fuel companies, he's certainly taking money from the tech companies and the private equity companies that are benefiting from those data centers that are there to increase fossil fuel demand. And again, this is another sign. He went to Governor Moore went to a tech conference billionaires summer camp a couple of weeks ago. And he surely has taken that Silicon Valley money, that private equity money, and that tech money that is reliant on those data centers that are running on fracked gas in in Maryland and in Pennsylvania and in New Jersey.
Michelle DeVillier. How important is the rail industry to maintaining Western Maryland products available with certainty?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Rail in Western Maryland used to be passenger and freight, and it used to allow for cities like Hagerstown and Cumberland and Frederick to be connected to DC and Baltimore. So you had these sort of foothills towns and Appalachian towns that were connected by rail for a long time. The passenger rail has gone away. CSX owns all of the rail line at this point for the most part. And that rail line is used to move coal to their export terminal in a working class neighborhood in Baltimore. Moves other stuff too, but it is used to move that coal there. The passenger rail has been replaced by highways, which is great if you have a car, or okay if you have a car, but not nearly the same thing. So what you have now is these sort of distribution centers that have popped up in some of those places, big, massive Amazon and Lowe's and Walmart distribution centers and things like that. But they are not really there to make sure that the people of Western Maryland have what they need. They're there to load onto trucks to drive up and down I-87 so that they can go, to the western part of the East Coast. So I think we need to have rail that is committed to the people of Maryland, not the corporations that are using it to traffic coal through here for export to other places. And I think we need to reinvest as much as we can in making those towns that were built on industry and built on rail have access to industry and rail again.
Okay, Andy, it looks like our hour is up. I think, what you just called for calls for Public Rail Corporation.
Yeah.
Maybe it's part of an energy corporation, so the planning could be coordinated or separate. That's for the, the economists and engineers and technocrats, to business managers to recommend the best form for that. But yeah, CSX is not going to build passenger rail. In fact, they're not hardly keeping their freight rail up. They have too many accidents, and a lot of them involve oil tankers as well as coal trains, and it's a problem. And
let me say real quick, I know we're close to the time, but let me say this. They have an export terminal in a small working class neighborhood in Baltimore. And so they're taking that coal to this export terminal called Curtis Bay. And in Curtis Bay, there is a huge pile of coal sitting in the open air that is right there in these people's neighborhoods. And over the years, they have demonstrated a really good example of grassroots environmental justice organizing. Over the years, they have demonstrated that coal is affecting the health and well-being of the community. They've demonstrated that it is a toxic hazard, and the state, whether under Republican administrations or Democratic administrations, has played nice words with those communities, but has always sided with CSX because CSX is a big donor to both parties, and that's why we say billionaires own both parties, and we got to vote green in order to build an alternative to it.
Any last thoughts before we wrap up that you want to share with people?
Yeah. So first off, thank you, Howie, so much for the opportunity to come on your show. I really appreciate the work that you have done over the time to lay the theoretical base for us to run this kind of campaign. And we need to have a campaign. We need to have a Green Party campaign that is focused not just on giving people choices, but is focused on changing outcomes in line with our values. And I think you have really done a lot of the work to lay the theoretical groundwork for that. And our campaign is building on that theoretical groundwork. And I'm excited about where we are. I think we have a really good opportunity to really use this as a transformative opportunity. This summer, we're working on an effort to try to raise $50,000 so that we can start hiring people. Because at the end of the day, the people that you are able to put to work on your campaign are the ones who are going to help us achieve those, or help achieve those goals. So if you have $5, $15, $500, $5,000, whatever it is, and you want to help us go forward with this mission and go forward with this campaign, there's some links that I think Howie's going to share about the way that we see fundraising and what we're going to use it for. But that's real. The difference between us getting 1% and having a functional value for the Green Party and us having a transformative effort to make Maryland a multi-party state with a grassroots left party is whether we can invest in people this year so that they can work for a year to do the kind of organizing and kind of building that's going to be necessary. So I hope Howie has those links to share. You can find some of them on my website at the 500-day plan page, and my donate page is www.gogreen2026.com/donate. And we will use it to, we're not getting rich off of it, but we are paying working class people who've been longtime Greens to make sure that they can help us build the movement that we need in order to transform Maryland into a multi-party state that is focused in justice, ecology, democracy, and peace.
Well, thank you, Andy. The links that Andy referenced about his campaign plan and his financial plan are at 306 in the chat. And the donate page, if you didn't catch it when he said it verbally, is at 317 in the chat. So before you get off, make sure you get those links. And so let's put one more link in there. We talked a little bit about the Mamdani campaign, which I think we have a lot to learn from, both positive and negative. And I wrote about it in that long 14,500 word article that was in Counterpunch about a week ago. I put the link to that in the last podcast. But Against the Current has taken the sections on Mamdani and turned it into an article, the first phase of the Mamdani campaign. So that's evaluating what we can learn and what we see are the problems of how trying to take on the power structure within the power structure in the Democratic Party has its problems. So let's there it is. It's in the chat. So take a look at that if you want. Next week, I don't have a guest plan, but current events, man, they keep moving on. Is Epstein finally the chink in his armor? There's some polling to indicate that. And meanwhile, the carnage in the Middle East, in Ukraine and Sudan continues. Myanmar, there's lots of international things we can talk about. And domestically, the thugs that are, from ICE and DHS that are snatching people off the street continues. The courts, there's so much we can talk about. So if I'm not guaranteed I won't have a guest, but I don't have one planned next. So if we don't, we'll do, comments and questions and answers and, talk about these things. In the meantime, keep the faith. You got to realize that what we do makes a difference. And, the problem we face in this country is we've already got public opinion, majority opinion with us on, policy issues. The problem in this country is translating policy into practice in the government, translating public opinion into public policy. And that's why we need the Green Party. So, do what you can this week, and we'll meet again next week and talk about it some more. So have a good week, everybody.